And no, it's not Thursday, but we've decided the At Issue panel is needed a day early to dive into the ethics watchdog's ruling against the Prime Minister. Andrew Coyne is in Toronto. Chantal Hébert is in Montreal. Okay, how damaging is this, Chantal? Why don't you start?
Actually, the report itself, when you read it, is more damaging than just the finding that the Prime Minister broke some rules. Because when you go through the sequence that Mary Dawson has laid out, the Ethics Commissioner, what you see is that it took a fairly high amount of willful blindness on the part of the Prime Minister to make himself believe that he was breaking no rules by going on this vacation.
Andrew.
And he tried to make the same case to her, and she pretty much blew it out of the water. This business about, oh, it was just a good friend who he hadn't seen in 30 years except for once at his father's funeral. Even friends don't necessarily give you large gifts at the time that they're lobbying the government, having dealings with the government. Look, if this had been another minister in the cabinet, presumably he or she would be out of their job right now. The Prime Minister broke the law in 4 different places, and that's just talking about the Conflict of Interest Act. I've seen people talking that, in fact, you could argue there were criminal code provisions broken here. If you're taking gifts from people who are doing business with the government, that's serious business.
So there are, yeah, go ahead, Chantal.
I think there are some Liberal strategists who think they dodged the bullet by not having this happen while the House was sitting. I'd argue, one, that the scrum the Prime Minister gave and this embarrassing moment where he seemed at a loss for arguments to justify his side of the story, and the fact that it wasn't question period and the opposition asking for partisan reasons just before Christmas when people are going to be talking about stuff like that over turkey dinners is more devastating than a bad question period.
Yeah, I mean, there are no penalties attached to it. So this is really about how Canadians perceive this. Is it not, Andrew?
Well, yeah, but that's also a question is, and this has come up again and again, is our ethics laws, our ability to hold people to account is noticeably weak in this country. Why aren't there penalties attached to this? Why is it just that you get, you have an embarrassing press conference where you look like a robot that's blown a circuit? But there ought to be presumably more stiffer consequences than this, and that should be one of the things that comes out of this.
The other good thing that may come out of this, if it is a good thing, is that if this report became the template for how the Ethics Commissioner approaches his or her job, in this case, since the next one is a he, then we might have better rulings than we've had in the past. This one took almost a year. 4 months of that is part of the Prime Minister not being available for the initial interview. But still, when you read it, you're really presented with the facts that she was presented with, and you actually read this and think, this is, not at all the impression that the government or the Prime Minister tried to give, and that is something that I think politicians in the future may come to fear.
So he said that he's going to be more proactive in the future. He's not going to take any holiday with family or friends without running it past. But the Ethics Commissioner, what does this tell you about what might be happening in his office, inside PMO, about the kind of counsel he may or not be getting, about what he thinks about the decisions he's making? I don't know if you want to sort of speculate on that, Andrew.
Well, we've seen these kinds of blind spots before. Remember how unrepentant he was in the business of the private fundraisers with the Chinese billionaires. We've seen this with, these repeated occurrences where they just don't seem to be plugged into how people are viewing this, and somebody is not actually in touch with the fabled middle class that they propose to represent.
I don't put it on a staffer in the PMO that the Prime Minister would not recognize a conflict of interest that a cub reporter would have seen about his own job as a journalist. I can't believe that we would sit here and say, well, someone didn't make the Prime Minister realize what looks obvious when you read this report.
30 seconds. Is it long-lasting damage? Because he does seem to be a little Teflon-y. So is it long-lasting damage, Andrew?
We've discussed this before. I think that the damage is long-lasting, even if it isn't showing up yet in the top-line poll numbers. I think there is a growing impression of somebody who is the way certainly the opposition's trying to present him as being kind of entitled, not quite playing by the same rules as everyone else. It's the drip of these things that add up to something, I think.
Last word to you, Chantal.
I think he's going to have to spend a lot of downtime at Harrington Lake and not in some fancy resorts if he doesn't want this to stick.
Well, that ain't so bad. Thank you both. Appreciate you coming in on a Wednesday.